Hello, guys. We're going to descend a little bit into what Cliff High likes to call the woo-woo world. We're going to talk about UFOs a little bit. We're going to talk about how this could apply to Bitcoin. Now, I'm going to play a clip for you. It's from way back in the 1950s. Now, you have to understand something. The government had three official projects to study and classify the UFO phenomenon. They call it the UFO phenomenon, and why they linked the word phenomenon to it was they wanted to make it seem like it's more natural by saying phenomenon, like, like ball lightning is a phenomenon of nature. They wanted to, but in truth, the UFOs are real. Many people all over the world, from all countries of the world, have seen UFOs and seen things that they can't explain in the night sky. And so they were studying these things back in the 1940s and in the 1950s. They had three projects to study UFOs, the United States government. They had Project Sign, Project Grudge, and then Project Blue Book. Now, during that period in time, when Project Blue Book ended, they continued to study UFOs, and they continued to work along with the UFO phenomenon afterwards, but they made it classified, and these were not official studies. The first three studies were the official studies, the studies we know about. They just went undercover with it. They just went under with it, because what they found out through these studies and stuff was so dynamic, it was so earth-changing, that they could not have an official study anymore. This was too much of a bombshell.
Charges are absolutely untrue. Actually, the United States Air Force releases statistics on the UFO phenomena through the Department of Defense press desk periodically, and we've always honored accredited media when they want to investigate a given specific sighting.
There's nothing to hide.
There's nothing to hide at all.
Is there any
Yes, they do look on them as qualified observers. Actually, most people who report a UFO sighting are patriotic citizens who have been mystified by something that they've seen, and through a patriotic sense, report it to the local law enforcement officials or to the United States Air Force base near them.
And so anyway, getting back to the subject again, when we're outside, anytime you're outside, walking around in the world, you could, if you look carefully, there's people that go out hunting for meteors. And it's like beachcombing. If you ever went beachcombing, you go down the beach and you're looking for something that maybe that's come in, that's drifted in from Africa or something. Goodness knows what you'll find. You could find anything from soup to nuts. Well, things fall from space, too. And people go out and hunt meteors and meteorites, trying to find meteorites. They're very valuable, meteorites are. But there's other things that fall from space, too. UFOs fly through our skies. And going back to the earlier days of UFOs, a number of astronauts have came forward. Gordon Cooper was one of the astronauts that came forward. And he used to fly at high altitudes quite often. And you know what he said about the UFOs? He said that quite often they would be flying at extremely high altitude. They fly at such a high altitude that from the ground you can't see them. First off, these little discs approximate the size of an aircraft. Now, I'm going to include a document with this, and I'm going to put it up over my shoulder or behind me so that you guys can read it. And I'll tell you what the document is. It's called the Nathan Twining Memo. Now, it's an intermilitary document that became declassified into the National Archive. And this document was originally written back, and it was from one general to another general. Now, when you get a document that's within the military, and a general sends another general a document, it's not like in the regular world where people can lie and tell stories and stuff. Within the military, when you get one general talking to another general and sending him a memo, you can take that to, you can bet your bottom dollar that they get it correct. The military's like that. They have military precision. They don't lie to one another. They don't tell one another stories or falsehoods. They get the information dead on correct. That's the way the military works. And when you get an inner memo between two different generals talking to one another. So this Nathan Twining memo is very telling. And the fact that it's registered in the archive means that it's genuine. Absolutely genuine military document between two generals. You can bet on what it's saying is true. Now, early on in my studies of the UFO phenomenon, we're talking back when I was a young man, I started studying about UFOs. I was intensely interested in the subject. And when I first come across the Nathan Twining memo the first time, must have been back when I was only in my 30s, and I'm in my late 50s now. And when I read it, I realized that immediately. I said, hey, you know what? This is an intermilitary memo between high-ups within the military, and it's declassified, and it's within the National Archive. I said, you can bet your bottom dollar this is correct. And what did the document say? It says UFOs are, basically getting down to the nitty-gritty of what the document says, it says UFOs are real, not fictitious, and they are approximate the size of an aircraft, our aircraft. So now getting back to what I was talking about with the astronauts a couple minutes ago. I was talking about Gordon Cooper. He says that they used to fly along, he used to fly along at 30, 40,000 feet with these jets, and he said quite often he would look up and he would see way up higher, like 40,000 feet above him. He would see these discs. And he said the same thing. He said that these discs would approximate the maneuvers made by our aircraft, but he could see them from when he was up like 40,000 feet. He could look up above, and he up above the cockpit of his jet and look up, and he could see them up there like 40,000 feet above him or whatever, way up, way up. And he said they looked like they were little tiny things because he wasn't near that high. They were borderline space, and they're flying through really fast with these discs. Well, here's the thing. Just like when you're on beachcombing, every so often, one of these discs will blow up or fall out of the sky for whatever reason, who knows, and it'll crash into the earth. What they've done ever since the 1940s, and this is what I believe, this is my opinion. I mean, you guys can believe what you want to believe, but I've studied this a lot. I believe that ever since the 1940s, specifically in around 1946, 1947, that they've been actually have groups set up, teams set up to go out and collect and make recoveries of whatever falls from the sky that they can recover. And they've recovered, I think that they've recovered quite a lot. Quite a lot of technology. Okay? This is my personal belief. Now, here's the thing, is when they recover this technology, they do what's called Backengineering. It means they get a piece of recovered technology, and they don't understand it. It's just like a caveman getting a cell phone. He can't understand it. And so they put it away, and they start studying it, but very slowly, trying to figure out what in the hell is this thing? This is what they do. And they're trying to understand what it is. Slowly, they pick it apart, and they figure out, hey, this is this, or this is that. And they send it out to these companies and stuff. And the next thing you know, they're developing new technology. Now, there was a book written on this. It was called The Day After Roswell. And it was written by an insider who was high up within the military. And he actually got some of this recovered material in his possession way back in the late 1940s. And he was working for another general higher than himself. And the other general gave him several what they call artifacts from these crashed ships into his possession so that he could then sub those pieces out to different companies so that they could do them for research and development. So his job was to sub those pieces out to different companies and have them do research and development, all in secret. That was basically, now I'm putting it in a nutshell, basically what happened. What he would take these pieces, and the pieces that he had in his possession, he had a little small laser. It was a cutting laser. It was like a pen-like laser, a pen laser, but it was much stronger than these little pen lasers you buy on eBay today. It was more like something you could cut through anything with. And he had that. That was one of the things that he had. Now, you got to understand, this was back in like 1948 or something. I mean, this guy was getting this stuff. We didn't have lasers and stuff back then, right? And he got another device. It was actually, I think, a piece of fiber optic cable. He described the devices that he got. And this was fiber optics back then. We didn't have fiber optics either, and all these things. He says, he lists a number of the devices in his book that they back-engineered. And one of the things he said they back-engineered is fiber optics. He said the transistor was back-engineered. Now, what they do, from what I understand, is they back-engineer these things, and then they take the qualified scientists that worked on back-engineering in them, and they accredit the invention to these qualified scientists and say, hey, he invented it. But actually what he really did was back-engineer it. So this is what's been going on, I think, for the last, they're recovering whatever falls from the sky, kind of like beachcombing. They're right in there to get it. They recover it. They don't tell anybody what they've done. There's a very famous incident you can look up. It's called the Kecksburg UFO incident, where quite literally in Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, one of these craft came down and dug a big hole in the ground, and it was in there in the middle of the night, and the military come in. And it's amazing how quick they can come in and how quick they can disappear. They said that they hauled this thing out on the back of a big flatbed truck with a canvas over top of it, and they wouldn't let anybody see what it was, and that was the end of that. It disappeared that night. But a lot of people saw the thing in Kecksburg. Half of the town saw the thing before they were able to haul it out. And what the people said they saw was this craft that was about the size of a car, that was round and bell-shaped, and had some sort, it was like a big walnut-looking shape, and it had some sort of hieroglyphic writing on it. And then one guy came in, and he was coming through the woods to see the thing, like he heard about it, and the people, the townsfolk said, oh, there's this thing that crashed in the woods, you got to go see it. So he was like a hunter or whatever, and he was heading through the woods, and he saw the lights up through the trees up in front of him or whatever, you know, and where the crash was, and he almost got there, and this man in black stepped out from behind the trees and said, what are you doing here? You know, you're not supposed to be here. And they pointed guns at him, from what I understand. And then off in the woods where the lights were coming through the woods where the military was, he said he heard these howls, unearthly sounds, screaming. Could that have been the alien occupants? Maybe they were a bunch of Klingons from Planet X. Gosh only knows, right? But anyway, they recovered this technology, and maybe they just, the aliens on board might have just got whacked because the military was there. You know what I mean? And they hauled this thing away as fast as they could. They carted it off for study, for research and development. So you notice how our technology has moved forward so fast now. We have the cell phones. Could these cell phones, just speculating here, could these cell phones have actually been something that was part of this research and development? Could the aliens have had cell phones? And we now have Bitcoin on our cell phone. Okay? We now have Bitcoin on our cell phone, right? Could the aliens have had something like Bitcoin on the cell phone? And maybe it took them. Like, that was way back in 1947, and this is almost 2020. You know, so we're talking 70 years here. Could have taken them about 60 or 70 years to figure out how stupid Bitcoin works. Maybe they got it on the phone there, and it was maybe Zarlonian credits, you know? like credits from Planet X, you know? And they might have not figured out what in the hell is this. It might took them 10 or 15 years just to figure out that it's money. Blockchain money. You know? I mean, this is where I'm going with this. I mean, is this so impossible for us to believe? Like, first off, we know the UFO phenomenon is real because these guys are telling us it's real. It's in the military that were studying it back in the 1950s. They're getting up there. They're not telling you that the UFOs are not real. They've had studies to study them. Project Sign, Project Grudge, Project Blue Book, and also all these studies that have probably come that are all undercover studies that we don't know anything about. In those studies, they don't come out and say, oh, the UFOs aren't real. No, they come out and they tell you, hey, guys, listen, these UFOs don't represent a threat to national security. That's what they tell you. They don't say they're not real. They just say that they're no threat. Well, actually, the truth is they've classified these UFOs back in the day when the H-bomb was the biggest security thing that there was. They actually classified these UFOs higher than the H-bomb in national security, like in secrecy. This is when they were developing the H-bomb. Back in the day when they had these studies like Sign, Grudge, Blue Book, they classified these UFOs as being the highest national security threat. At the same time, they came out and they said they're no threat to national security. They're lying to us through their teeth. Hasn't the government always been lying to us all along? And the UFO sightings, they never quit back in the 1940s. They're still continuing to this day. People are seeing them. People are taking qualified pictures of them, posting them on the internet, right? Now, some people come along and say, oh, that's all photoshopped. Okay, but an awful lot of these sightings and pictures and stuff were before the days of Photoshop. An awful lot of sightings you can see, and daylight pictures of the things and everything. We got all kinds of evidence. We got enough evidence. You could study it for the next 20 years. But you know what? If you do take the time to study it, and you get these guys out there saying, oh, none of this is real. It's not true. It's all baloney, right? But these guys have never studied it. You sit down there and you study this thing long enough, and after a while you're going to draw the conclusion that these things are real and that they are visiting our planet, right? And I've studied it for a long time. I've classified them into two different types of UFOs, first off. One of the types of UFOs I call a metaphysical UFO. And the other type is the real UFOs where you got a real structured craft. A craft that you can actually go over and put your hand on. So the metaphysical UFOs are more like these floating orbs or lights in the sky that nobody ever really seen a craft. What they seen was a light moving around. Kind of like there's places down in Texas you can go where they have a place called the Marfa Lights. You can look it up on the internet. This is what I classify as the type of UFOs that's metaphysical. And then there's the other type of UFO, which is more of the classic flying saucer type UFOs. So I've classified them into two classes of UFOs. Anyway, back into this Bitcoin. This is all just a theory of mine, but there's a few clues that I've gotten that this could be actually quite literally a possibility, you know. Anyway, I don't have enough time. I've already talked 17.4 minutes on this. I just thought it would be kind of interesting. I'll tell you another subject of my research. Going back to Roswell, you know. If you guys are familiar with I don't know if you're familiar with the Roswell Incident, but it's one of the most famous UFO incidents that occurred in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. A sheep farmer named Mac Brazel had a ranch there, and he called the military in because there was a whole bunch of scrap debris on his ranch that he couldn't understand what it was. Spread out over hundreds of meters, thousands of feet. Enough debris, a tremendous amount of debris, and he also found something that was rather large. It was so large he couldn't pick it up. He had to haul it back, I guess, to his barn with a tractor and a chain. That tells you how big it was of debris. So he called the military. I guess he called Jesse Marcel, which was the first and he was the intelligence officer of the 1st Nuclear Bombardment Group. Now, that tells you right up front that he's no dummy. They're not going to hire a dummy to work as the 1st intelligence officer of the 1st nuclear weapons that were dropped out at White Sands and stuff, you know. I mean, the Trinity site, you know, and things like that. They're not going to have a dummy working there. Jesse Marcel was no dummy. He come out and he looked at the debris, Jesse Marcel, and he said immediately, he said, this is not of this earth, because of the qualities and characteristics of the debris. It was like no metals he picked up were like nothing he'd ever seen before. He took some of them in. He took some of them and showed them to his kid, you know, and he took some of them in and he tried them out, like he put them on a drill press or whatever, and he couldn't drill through it, even with like a hardened steel bit. And that's light. It was light. It didn't have any weight to it. The metal, it was reflective and stuff, and he couldn't scratch it. He couldn't dent it. He couldn't do anything with the darn stuff. And so there was other things there. There's things like different types of materials and things that he couldn't understand, you know. And there was hieroglyphic writing on some of this material and stuff, and some of these little pieces, like different things that he found. He showed them to his kids, you know. And that same day, or was it the day before, or right in that same time frame, the military made a press release to the newspapers, and they said that they captured a disc on a ranch near Roswell. You know, and you know, when the military makes a press release like that, quite generally they make sure, very careful, that they get the story correct. That's the way the military works. So they made this press release. Then later, what happened was, I think his name was General Ramey. He came along and he covered up the whole thing. And he was working for higher-ups in command. I guess it was coming directly from Washington. And they wanted this covered up as fast as they could. They didn't want the story to leak out, so they covered up the story and they made a new story. The new story was it was just a weather balloon and a radar reflector out in the desert sand. You know. Meanwhile, they were taking like 7 flights. They were bundling up this material, putting it in big crates, and they made like 7 flights out to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in a big bomber. You know, and these bombers, you know, they're huge. These are the bombers that they delivered the first atomic weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan with. These bombers were like, they could carry, you could put your truck inside the back of one of these bombers, you know. You could probably put you've got 3 cars, you got 2 cars in a truck, you could probably put both cars in a truck in the back of that bomber. You know? Why would they need 7 flights? If this was just a weather balloon, you ever seen a weather balloon? You could fit it in your hand practically. And a radar target, you could fit the whole thing in a shoebox. So they made this story up. They had Jesse Marcel kneeling next to this torn up scraps of a weather balloon and a radar reflector target, and holding the pieces, and they took a bunch of pictures of them and they put it in the newspaper saying this is just a weather balloon and a radar target. Meanwhile, they hauled the real object out to Wright-Patterson, you know, and a lot of people got to see some of this stuff, because it's quite a big operation in the military. You're making 7 flights out to Wright-Patterson and trying to hide all this stuff on both ends, you know. I mean, but they were pretty darn good at covering the whole thing up. They covered it up, but there's been leaks over the years. And one of their biggest leaks came with this book that was written the day after Roswell, because one of these guys, he was out there and he saw it all. He said, he come forth later and he wrote a book, and it was called The Day After Roswell. And he said he even saw the bodies of the flight crew. And he said they weren't humans. Simple as that. He said that they were, in his book, I have trouble pronouncing his name, Corso, I think his name was. In his book, he said he saw one of the bodies. He said it was sitting there in a crate, and he said they went over and he took the cover off and he looked in and he saw one of the bodies. And he said it wasn't a human. It was some sort of a little creature of some sort or another. were the pilots of these ships that they knocked down. And why I say knocked down was because it said in that original press release, it said UFO disc captured. Captured. Captured is a war term. The enemy. You capture the enemy. And so, looking at this in a different way, they've always talked crash, crash, crash. The Roswell Incident, right? But this said captured. Captured. This was the first. This is almost like when you're in court, and the judge is trying to find out what's really going on. He looks for what's called Freudian slips. He looks for you to make a mistake and say something first, and then you might go along later and you might say something different, but you've already made the mistake. You've already blurted it out to the judge, and he knows what's up then. And that's what I do. I look at that first article that come out by the first press release, and it said flying disc captured on ranch near Roswell, and that tells me a lot. That tells me a lot. They can come along later and make up any story they want to try to cover it up, you know. But that first story, when they didn't have the cover up in place just yet, kind of tells me a lot, and that's what I look for, you know. And so that's where you get the truth. You get the truth from the first story. So anyway, there's more to this. When they were taking the pictures with Jesse Marcel, right, on the floor of the flying saucer debris, so-called flying saucer debris, which was really a radar target and this was the cover-up. When they were taking the pictures of the cover-up, this General Ramey was there in the room too, and he had a paper with him in his hand, and he was kneeling down next to Jesse Marcel and watching what was going on. He was like making sure that Jesse did a good job taking these pictures and stuff for the cover-up, right? But he had a military memo in his hand, and they were taking these pictures on the camera, right? Well, back then they didn't have the technology to do computer analysis of the photographs, right? But in the modern day, we've got computer analysis now, and people have blown up the photograph and read the memo that was in his hand. And that's a smoking gun memo. It talks about everything in there. You can look that up on the internet. You can just put maybe put in smoking gun, UFO, Roswell, something like that, and put in Ramey memo or something like that, you know, a photograph of Ramey, it's there. You'll find it in the UFO stuff. Anyway, that memo was really something that he had in his hand. They couldn't get all of the words exactly right that was in it, but anyway, it's a very interesting subject, the UFOs, and it's ongoing. It's ongoing. We still have UFO sightings all around the Earth, and when there's a lot of sightings in one particular region, like, you know, they call that a flap, a UFO flap. And what happens is an awful lot of strange things start to happen when they're having a UFO flap. Anyway, it's an interesting subject. Listen, I've talked too long. Maybe I'll get into it a little bit more some other time, talk about it a little bit more. Thank you guys for listening. Like and subscribe. We'll catch you in the next show. Bye-bye, guys.